Which one of you tried to cancel Matt Walsh? He is the owner of our proud Christian Minecraft server, and which one of you did it? Which one of you did it? Because apparently it happened. Apparently some Twitter outrage mob tried to cancel him, and he's very upset about that. His video about it is him, with the thumbnails, him having a smug expression and, I don't know, some representation of a Karen just being mad. I don't know, let's see. Let's see what happened.
Last night, after our backstage episode wrapped, which, by the way, you should go to dailywire.com or YouTube after you're done with this show to watch it.
No, probably you shouldn't. But, let's continue.
But only after you're done with this show. I logged onto Twitter to discover that I was trending nationwide. One thing I've learned over the years is that when I trend, it's never because everyone is happy about something I said.
Maybe, so, if the only times you trend are because people are upset about something you said, maybe that doesn't mean that you're right all the time. Just saying.
I've never trended because everyone is saying, wow, I agree with this point that Matt Walsh made.
Yeah. So, while there is an argument ad populum issue, when you try to say that everybody agrees with me, therefore I'm right, it's equally fallacious to try to make the point that everybody disagrees with you and therefore, it's still ad populum.
I'm not sure if anyone trends for that reason, but I certainly don't. For me, it's always because people are very mad, very upset, very outraged about some opinion or some other opinion that I expressed. And that was certainly the case here. In this situation, people on the internet were quite apoplectic about a tweet that I sent out in reaction to a new Gallup poll, which showed that the number of kids and young adults who identify as LGBT has risen in an extraordinary and sudden way over the last few years.
An extraordinary and sudden way, huh? Man, I'm curious as to what the context of this is. Now, I'm fairly certain I already know, but, it'll be interesting to hear his perspective, right?
This is what I wrote. I said, the number of kids who identify as LGBT, especially trans and bisexual, has absolutely skyrocketed. If you think this is a natural or organic development, you're deluded. The media, Hollywood, and the school system actively recruit children into the LGBT ranks.
What? Matt. Are you saying there's like a white van with LGBT spray painted on the side and they drive up to the school and some random guy from the last Hollywood blockbuster comes out and goes, "All right, guys, it's time to get into the LGBT military. Got everybody, we're going in. This is the recruitment drive. You got the Air Force, you got the Navy, you got the Marines, you got us. We're the queer force. We are actively recruiting in your school." Matt, are you so thoroughly deluded to think that kids are being recruited into the LGBTQ community? With that smug-ass expression? Okay, Matt, let me explain this very clearly. As the world becomes more socially progressive, especially here in the United States, as people learn that certain things like being gay isn't bad, being bi isn't bad, being trans is a thing that happens, and it happens naturally. As people understand these things, they have the ability to identify them easier. Imagine, for a moment, a world in which you've never seen a gay person. You are not attracted to women, and you can't really explore an attraction to men because you have never lived in a world where that's accepted. The idea that that's even a possibility is completely out of the window. I mean, let's just take this from an anime perspective, just for shits and giggles. How many times have you seen this in like a Yuri anime? But we're both girls. Okay, even though the idea that lesbians exist is a pretty universally accepted thing now, especially here in the States. Consider living in a world where it's not. Consider living in a world where you have no idea these things are even possibilities. If you were asked, are you gay, are you bi, are you pan, are you straight, you probably wouldn't know how to answer that in that world. Now, let's imagine that world is a little more progressive. They accept that gay people exist, they're on TV a little more, but, gay marriage still isn't legal, and your parents are homophobes. You're asked the same question. You're probably still compelled to answer straight. Now let's say that we're in the modern world where the likelihood your parents are homophobes is at least a little less, unless they're Christian fundagelicals, and society generally accepts people who are gay. It's a general thing. We're not quite where we need to be where it's normalized, but general acceptance is not uncommon these days. Depending on your region. I mean, here in the American South, it's a bit harder to find that. Going up in north places like New York is a little easier. In that world, what's the likelihood that you'll identify when you're younger as gay, if you happen to be? Well, it's certainly much higher. It's certainly a whole lot higher. Rowlith. Rowlith is doing the Bork. She is doing the Bork. Now, I want you to consider all the things I just said, and now trade out gay for trans. Now, anybody who's paid even a little bit of attention to the social needle in the United States knows that the conversation where trans folks are concerned is a little messier, and it's a whole lot harder to justify and deal with. It shouldn't be, but currently it is. There are people who accept gay people as existing with no problems whatsoever, but the minute you bring up a trans person, suddenly things have shifted, things are not okay, everything's bad. The social progress that we've experienced where gay people are concerned, with trans people we are nowhere near where we need to be. But we are still further along now than we were 10 years ago. And we were further along 10 years ago than we were 20 years ago. Now, when that happens, now there's a thing that happened recently as well, gay marriage became legal, a decade ago. When that happens, what do you expect with the next generation? The next generation that grows up with these things existing on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, any social media that they have, Twitter, that generation is going to be a lot more open to these things. Generally speaking, you're still going to find the odd homophobe, you're still going to find the frequent transphobe, but it's going to be more likely that these people are going to grow up in a world where things are accepted. And when these things are accepted, the likelihood of people coming out, see, it's not that more gay people are manifesting, it's that more people are coming out, more people are having a chance to explore these parts of themselves. That gets represented on data, and sometimes it can get represented as an explosion. There's nothing wrong with that, though. That's still organic. It's not some Army recruitment center for the LGBTQ alliance bringing all of the queers to go storm the Capitol or some shit. Matt?
I followed that up with this. I said the number of supposedly trans children and young adults is 10 times higher.
Don't you like how he says supposedly? Supposedly. He can't accept that a child might be trans. He can't accept that all the science that we would use to determine somebody is trans as an adult might also apply to kids in their formative years. That idea escapes him. It's got to be supposedly trans.
The number among older generations. Do you think that's because a lot more people are born in the wrong body these days? Whatever the hell that means? No, this is so...
Whatever the hell that means. Oh my god, dude, it's very simple. It's very simple. In the early stages of development, certain people, it doesn't happen all the time, but certain people get an excess of hormone washing in the womb. This is a natural thing. This can cause mismatches in the body going forward for this person growing up. We also have issues where brain matter is sometimes different between people. So, like, a male might have 6.5 times more gray matter in their brain, but a cis female might have 10 times more white matter in her brain. And then we have this more female-aligned brain. Not that that is always the case, but sometimes it is. In a man's body, and then there's a mismatch, suddenly this person is experiencing things like dysphoria, or on the opposite end, whenever they perform as a separate gender, they experience gender euphoria. That's not a supposedly thing. That's a thing that we can measure as experience. But, go off being wrong.
Social engineering. In our culture, the LGBT lobby poses the greatest threat to our children, especially the T part. So, there it is. The opinion that I have been, that's the opinion that I've been reliably informed by thousands of people is detestable, outrageous, hateful, bigoted, and so on.
It is all of those things, Matt. All of those things it is, on top of ignorant.
And much of the reaction was exceedingly unhinged, but none more so than the response from Parker Malloy over at Media Matters, who sent out a frantic string of tweets implying that I'm a pedophile for these opinions.
Well, I'm not going to say that you are, Matt. What I will say, though, is you seem to be very concerned with matters that involve children's genitalia. That part is actually true, though, based on what you said here. Focusing on trans children is focusing a lot, functionally, on children's genitalia, Matt.
On what basis were these accusations made? Well, no basis, of course. It's just...
Well, the basis is that you're focusing a lot on children, trans kids, and not as an advocacy thing. You're trying to argue that their identity matches their genitals, which requires an inordinate amount of time thinking about children's genitals, Matt. Now, I'm not saying that you are a pedo. I'm not saying that this is a good or bad thing in this particular regard. If you're engaging in the conversation, you've only got the chance to engage with it in this particular way. But it doesn't make it not weird.
Just that Parker Malloy disagrees with me, thus feels entitled to make up literally any lie at all in retribution. Those tweets have all now been deleted, by the way.
And you didn't archive them, did you? That archive of those tweets could have revealed some context, but now that the tweets have been deleted, which I don't have the archive for them, and you don't seem to be showing them yet, you can just literally make up whatever the implication of them is.
This is what we're dealing with from the opposition. People scummy enough to defame and slander their ideological opponents, but too cowardly to stand by the defamation. Most of the rest of the tweets and messages I've received have been more along the lines of, calling me a piece of garbage, an idiot, a worthless sack of such and such.
So many based opinions today. Nice.
I should kill myself, etc., and so forth.
Oh, wait, he endorses, according to Marocat in the chat, he endorses genital inspections for children. Oh, it makes much more sense now. If that is the case, again, I do not have evidence here. I don't have evidence here, so without strict evidence right now, I can't make that distinction. But if some are provided to me, then maybe that would put that in context.
So, first of all, after receiving all of this feedback and seeing that my words were so deeply hurtful to so many people, I want to say with all sincerity that I am not sorry at all. Not even a little bit.
Of course. Let that fucking douchey expression on his face. Look, okay, hyperbolic, completely hyperbolic. But it is at this moment that I look at that face and my brain immediately goes, huh, that is quite the impact target. That is quite the punchable face today. Now, I'm not saying enact violence against Matt. No, don't ever do that. But do recognize when someone, like me, has a very punchable face. I know I do. I look in the mirror and I want to punch me all the time.
I couldn't be less sorry for what I said. I'm 100% right. Everything I said was absolutely and totally correct, and I'm so happy that I said it.
Wow. This is what you get with your standard Matt Walsh flavored bigotry. Now, granted, there is a side of this that I do want to consider, and that is that maybe an outrage mob going against him can cause somebody to dig in their heels. But I don't think that's what's going on here. Matt, my experience with Matt over the times I've done videos on him has been that he's just a standard flavored douche.
I am not and could never be sorry for being right. I will, however, happily accept the apologies of any of my critics, should they decide to offer them. I'm all ears for that. I am a gracious and forgiving man in that way.
That's not gracious and forgiving. That's just smug and narcissistic. All of this is just smug narcissism. And I bet you, your audience is eating it up. Let's take a look. I haven't even looked at the ratio on this video. 5K likes, 38 dislikes. Okay. Your audience, definitely. Let's see here. Top comments. refreshing to see someone taking their stand for their beliefs and not bowing down to the woke mob. Only an overly privileged society could afford expending so much energy to outrage. Ah, yes! Consider the outrage of the United States as a privileged society when trying to earn its independence from the United Kingdom. Consider the outrage of native tribes, the privilege of them as they expended their outrage as we were destroying their lands and genociding their people. Yep, only a privileged society could engage in outrage. Only them. This is a free masterclass in how to deal with Twitter outrage. I hate that this is actually kind of right, though. Like, when it comes to Twitter outrage, you got two options. You do. You have the option of standing firm and going, no, you're wrong, if indeed you're right. And you do have the option of, kowtowing, which means that you might end up having to kowtow later. Now, I'm not saying that Matt made the right decision here because I think that he's fundamentally wrong. But it is at least true that where Twitter outrage is concerned, you do have the options of kowtowing or not. But his whole comment section, they eat stuff like this up. And he knows they do. That's how he makes his money.
But as for being sorry myself, not a chance. Not ever. Not ever. I am, though, happy to explain why I'm right.
Oh, okay.
About what I said. This is an important issue. By far, one of the most important issues that our culture faces in the present moment. It's worth talking about in greater detail. So, first, let's go back and look at the numbers, okay? According to Gallup, the overall number of Americans who identify as LGBT is up to 5.6%. That's a 1% increase from the last tally in 2017. That's a significant jump in just 3 or 4 years. But the truly seismic shifts can be seen among the youngest generations. Among Gen Z, and Gallup defines that as those born between 1997 and 2002. So this doesn't even take into account the very youngest generations, where we can assume the figures are even more dramatic. But among Gen Z, a full 16%, 15.9 to be exact, identify as LGBT.
Okay. So is it identify as LGBT or identify as LGBTQI+? Because if it's just LGBT, then you've got children who are lesbians, children who are, and when I say children, I mean people under 18. People can figure out that they're lesbian or gay or even trans by that age. Easy. It happened for hundreds of people in my high school. It's normal. If we are also considering people that are queer, by some people's definitions, me being demisexual is part of the LGBTQIA+ umbrella. For all intents and purposes, I consider myself, standard, just cis hetero guy, but there are some more broad definitions that do include these things. I do not trust Matt, as he has not flashed anything on the screen, and looking at the preview, he's not going to. I don't trust his portrayal of this. Now, it is also important to consider the fact that, like I said earlier, as society becomes more progressive and accepting of these things, people can explore these parts of themselves at younger and younger ages. It used to be that you could not explore the idea that you might be gay or you might be trans until you were well into your 30s. You had a well-established career, you were as far from your parents and family as you possibly could be, and you could do these things essentially in private where you wouldn't get attacked at all for just merely existing as yourself. As society becomes more progressive, people can explore these things at younger and younger ages in safer and safer environments. The numbers exploding is what we would expect, Matt. It's exactly what we would expect. This is not some random thing that is because Hollywood is throwing up dark vans to our children and trying to convert them into this woke religion or some shit. This is literally what we expect to see.
Another 5% have apparently no opinion about their own sexual orientation. Breaking down the numbers further, 2.1% of Gen Zers say they're gay, 1.4% say lesbian. Both of these figures represent at least a doubling over Gen X and older generations.
Now, what he hasn't done yet is explained why this is a bad thing. Even if we accept all these things, even if we accept all this, we still haven't accepted the premise that this is bad. You see, awkwardly, we can live in the world where Matt Walsh is correct that Hollywood is recruiting people into the LGBTQIA plus demagoguery, and yet we would also live in the world where he has not yet proven that these are bad things. Even if we grant the entire premise here, he has not demonstrated that being trans is bad. He has not demonstrated that being gay is bad, lesbian is bad, bi is bad, what have you. All he's demonstrated nothing, but if we accept the premise, then he's maybe demonstrated that there are more queer people in the world that exist. Cool.
And then another 11.5% say they're bisexual. The number of trans people in Gen Z is almost 2%, 1.8% right now.
Okay.
Now, that might seem like a small portion, but keep in mind that 1.8% is nearly 10 times higher, as I said in the tweet, nearly 10 times higher than the portion among Gen X and older generations.
Because trans visibility is also higher, Matt. And this isn't a Hollywood thing. This is actually grassroots, ground level stuff. Go on TikTok. You will find hundreds of trans creators. Go on YouTube. You will find hundreds of trans creators, both in the large varieties, talking about people like ContraPoints, to even smaller people like X-Cult Baby and Luxander. You will, Unholy Shade, again, who actually got in the news. These people, they are all in the media. Hell, and it's not mainstream media. This is just the stuff that people consume. Mainstream media, on the whole, has been on a downward decline for ages. The people who Matt believes control the entire world, their influence on generations has been waning as the social media influencer gains power. And again, he still hasn't demonstrated that any of this is good, bad, or what have you, but just consider what it's like if you're considering your religion and you happen upon atheist YouTube. The likelihood that you might be able to identify as an atheist as you learn about different structural arguments and just get it normalized to you that atheists exist gets higher. It gets normalized to you when you discover trans creators on the internet. It gets normalized to you when you discover gay creators on the internet, when you discover people who are GRSM or LGBTQIA advocates or part of those communities as a whole. We live in an age where some of the most influential people are not your Hollywood actors and actresses. They are the people that your kids can look at their phone and immediately absorb their content. People who don't release a movie every 2 or 3 years, they release content sometimes every day, forming parasocial relationships with they're not forming the parasocial relationships, but younger people are forming parasocial relationships with them. I can't count the amount of times that I've gotten people in my comment section saying that they're more comfortable being polyamorous because I'm a creator on the platform who's poly, or they're more comfortable being an atheist because I'm a creator on the platform who's an atheist. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's just what happens when you have a technologically advanced society where people are able to be exposed to other different people. Hell, I didn't even come to the conclusion that I was gender apathetic, that I didn't care about that it didn't affect me, that if I woke up with different parts tomorrow, it would do nothing to my day. That conclusion was not reached until I hopped behind a VTuber avatar and started speaking through it. And then realized that, oh shit, as I exposed myself to this thing on the internet, I discovered a part of me. This happens, Matt. You are functionally being the old man waving his fist at the cloud because the cloud isn't the same shape it was when you were a kid.
And keep in mind again, also, that this does not take into account those who are born after 2002.
Yeah, I expect that number to increase. Again, TikTok being ubiquitous, YouTube being ubiquitous. TikTok has a lot more gay and trans representation on it than the previous iteration that I grew up with, Vine, did. This is what you would expect. This is normal. If you take an ounce of time to look at the world around you, Matt, this is what you would expect, and it's not a bad thing, and it's not because Hollywood is influencing your children to go join gay Satan.
And it's the after 2002 generation, those who were born while I was in high school, who've really been hit the hardest by LGBT indoctrination.
Indoctrination. Ah, yes, I remember being indoctrinated when I was, and I'm still cis. I remember being indoctrinated merely by stumbling upon creators that just existed as themselves. Totally was indoctrination.
Yes, LGBT indoctrination. That is what's happening here, and I cannot take seriously anyone who would deny it.
Okay, define indoctrination. Because if we're going to use indoctrination by a very loose definition, then I can't take you seriously. But, you know, just for sake, let's go ahead. We're going to do an etymological fallacy for a second. Just for a sec. So, indoctrinate. To teach, to accept set of beliefs uncritically. Okay. So, if we merely accept that gay people exist without being critical of them, that's indoctrinating? I mean, definitionally, maybe. I would think that more people should be able to be critical of this stuff, because generally, when you get people who are willing to sit down and study the sociological effects of these things, they end up being better advocates as a result, but, you know, what have you. I'm interested to see what Matt's definition of indoctrinate would be here, because I don't really see it.
The drag queen story hours. The trans books for kids.
The trans books for kids I've seen, the ones that come to mind were stuff like the Irreversible Damage one, where it was just all about saying that being trans is bad. But, you know, whatever.
The gender theory propaganda shoved into kids' minds at the youngest ages. The constant promotion of LGBT lifestyles and identities by school, Hollywood, the media.
What's an LGBT lifestyle? Please explain. I've never had this adequately explained to me, and I don't think it can be explained because there's no such fucking thing as an LGBT lifestyle. Just like there's no fucking thing as a straight lifestyle, Matt. Existing, mere existence, is not a lifestyle, Matt.
And so on. All of this has two clear and purposeful effects. Number one, it makes it seem trendy and cool to be LGBT. We've gone way beyond mere acceptance or toleration. We have long since gone way beyond those things. It is now, for many young people, seen as more interesting, more fashionable to be able to tack a few letters from the sacred initialism onto your name. Okay,
cool. And if that's the case, who cares? Seriously. Seriously, that's literally like being angry that people are wearing a name brand shirt and they find it cool. Cool. Let's accept your premise. Let's accept it, Matt. I'm willing to grant that that's what's happening. Okay? I don't believe it, but let's grant it for the sake of argument. And what do we have? We have a reality now, Matt, where you're angry that somebody's wearing a different branded shirt than you. That's it. That's functionally where you land. Somebody's wearing a shirt of a different brand than you, and you don't like it, and it upsets you very much because you prefer wearing a brand that's more plain or more to your taste or what have you. Ignoring the fact that existing in that way is you having your own brand that you prefer. You're doing the exact same thing. Even if we accept that all it is fashion, even if we accept all of that, we have not demonstrated harm. All we've demonstrated is that you're upset because you're a brand loyalist. And people who have a different brand make you angry. That's all we've gotten.
You know, years of associating being cisgender and white with being privileged.
There is a privilege to both those things. Me being white means I don't have to worry as much whenever I get stopped by a police officer. Me being cis means I don't have to explain my gender identity to my parents in 30 years because I started performing as myself instead of as the lovely little boy they thought I was. There is a privilege to those things. There's a struggle associated with being trans where you have to deal with coming out and you have to deal with things like HRT and surgery and community acceptance and being kicked out of various jobs. Things that I will never have to experience, and as a result, those things are a privilege. Privileges are things you get by default. By default, I didn't have to deal with this shit. That's a privilege to me.
And being privileged with being an oppressor and a bully has an impact, it turns out. It's supposed to have an impact. It is designed to have the very impact that it's having. But if you point out that the strategies are working, you'll be called a bigot for noticing that there's a strategy at all.
Well, if anything, a strategy of normalization potentially leading to people like, again, say Contra, becoming trans icons, it doesn't do anything for your argument. You've got to demonstrate that this is a bad thing. Otherwise, you're just upset that society's doing what society does, and if your argument is going to boil down to, we live in a society, then I don't care, Matt. I don't care. I don't think anybody else should care either.
So that's the first thing. The second is that kids are being taught to view sex, gender, and sexual orientation a certain way. They're being
just like you were taught to view it a certain way. Was yours good and this one bad merely because this one's different?
indoctrinated into a view of sex and orientation that, when adopted by large numbers of people, will automatically and by design increase the LGBT ranks.
Ranks. Like they're a frickin' army or something.
For example, kids are being taught now that if you're a boy with feminine tendencies, then you might actually be a girl. If you're a girl with masculine tendencies, you might actually be a boy.
Yeah, you might. You might also be non-binary. You might also just be a tomboy. You might be a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with that, Matt.
Kids are taught that this is a possibility and encouraged to explore that possibility.
Yeah, what's wrong with exploring it? Seriously, if you were to put on a dress right now and explored your feminine side, what would be the negative detriment? What would be the negatives, Matt? What? If you found out you were uncomfortable in that dress, guess what? You would have lived that experience and you would have been able to go, no, I experienced uncomfort. I experienced something that might even be akin to dysphoria when I tried performing outside of my gender. Cool. Now you can say you've had that experience. Nothing wrong with that. Literally nothing wrong with that. Just...
back when kids were not being taught this kind of anti-scientific nonsense.
It's not anti-scientific. Literally, a child psychologist can run you through scientifically how you would go about doing these experiments for yourself to figure out what you are more or less comfortable with. And if your argument's going to be that comfort isn't an accurate measure of anything, then you've got to argue against things like the science behind painkillers that literally function to make a person more comfortable by design.
A girl with masculine tendencies was just a girl with masculine tendencies. A tomboy, we might have called her. Some girls were that way, and that was...
And some girl... I know girls right now who are tomboys, who aren't trans. They still exist, Matt. Nobody's taking your tomboy fetish away from you. Nobody.
That's fine. Some boys were more feminine, and that was fine too.
No, it wasn't. Not for you. I can't fucking tee that.
Now, we're ushering those types of girls and boys under the trans umbrella. What we're effectively...
No, we're not. No, we're not. You don't usher tomboys under the trans umbrella. Anybody who's trans can tell you this. Anybody who's engaged with the community can tell you this. Nobody says a tomboy is trans. They say they might be trans. Hey, maybe you should explore this part of yourself. See if you are. I know that I'm apathetic and also identify as male because I'm literally sitting here exploring that side of myself every time I go onto freaking YouTube. There's nothing wrong with me doing that. There's nothing wrong with you doing it.
Effectively saying is, you can't be that kind of girl or boy anymore.
Yes, you can. Nobody said you can't.
Those don't exist anymore.
Yes, they do, Matt. Nobody said they don't.
Because if you're a feminine boy, then you're a girl.
No, that's not what people are saying. This is a straw man.
If you're a masculine girl, then you're a boy.
Nope, nobody says that, Matt. This is a straw man. I'm repeating myself. I'm repeating myself.
Why do you think there are now more young people who call themselves trans than call themselves lesbian?
Oh my god. Oh my god. This is the fucking lesbian erasure shit. Where, like, lesbians, people who happen to be lesbian, who have zero personality, I'm talking about Ariel, who have zero personality and wonder why they can't get a lesbian date, so they blame it on the existence of trans people. This is that. This is just that again, Matt. Oh, this is just that. Matt, look. When people do not have a way to identify outside of lesbian, they might not be able to explore other identities that they might have. But as the option becomes available to them to explore other identities, they might realize, hey, I'm a lesbian and also I'm non-binary, femme present. You didn't erase a lesbian. You didn't. You might have erased a lesbian if you found that this woman, or assigned woman at birth, actually was a man. Their gender was man. They go and they do whatever things you require, Matt, for somebody to function as a guy to you, whatever arbitrary standards you put up. Then that person becomes functionally straight, but again, these are all labels we assign that are loosey-goosey to begin with. Yeah, maybe you've erased a lesbian then, but again, who fucking cares? You argued earlier that there's more lesbians in the world and that's a bad thing, and now you're arguing that there's fewer lesbians than trans people and that's supposedly a bad thing. Is there any interpretation of these numbers that's a good thing to you, Matt? Any of them at all? Or are they all just, as I would say, neutral and don't matter?
And there are almost as many, and soon will be more, young people calling themselves trans than gay.
Okay, and why does that matter? People can explore their identities more. You've got a gay person who realizes that they're trans, so then they, instead of being a guy attracted to a guy, are now a girl attracted to a guy. They are trans, and it is officially a heterosexual relationship. No different than if I, as a heterosexual person, were to date a trans woman right now. That would still be a heterosexual relationship. That is a person that I perceive as male. They perceive themselves as male. My brain is or they perceive themselves as female. My brain is wiring this. We both perceive them as female. I misspoke there. My brain is wiring this exactly as it would for a cis relationship. This is not complicated. This is not even a bad thing.
Why is that? Because we've given young people this new framework for understanding themselves.
Yeah, that's a good thing. You got one thing right, but you're probably going to argue it's bad.
The problem is that the framework is totally false, incoherent, and based in pseudoscience.
How is it incoherent, and how is it based on pseudoscience? We actually understand hormonal washing decently well, though not enough to engage in any type of predictive power yet, because when it comes to identity, the brain is a really fucking complex thing. Just like we can't use science right now to measure somebody's favorite flavor ice cream without them literally trying every flavor of ice cream so that we can go through the scientific method and deductively produce what their favorite flavor of ice cream is. And we might even find that when we do that, when we discover what their favorite flavor of ice cream is because we've used the dopamine receptors in their brain to measure the exact amount, we know which one produces the most dopamine whenever they eat it. We know what their favorite one is. 10 years down the road, they might have a different flavor. And that doesn't mean your science was wrong. It just means that people change. Because that's the thing about the human brain, is that it's not set in stone. Which is why you can't tell from a hormonal wash at age 1 what gender somebody's going to be at age 15 or age 30. You have no way of knowing at that point, at least not yet. We don't have a model that does that because, like something like ice cream, it comes down to part of somebody's identity. Something that we do not have an accurate measuring device for. Not yet. That doesn't make it pseudoscience, Matt. Functionally, right now, the only thing you have is asking somebody their pronouns or asking somebody their identity. No different than trying to figure out the scientific configuration that led to somebody's name. Gender is like a name, Matt. It's a socially constructed identifier that people do or do not associate themselves with. And you don't use the scientific method to determine whether or not a name fits on a person. This is categorically separate from that type of methodology. It doesn't make it suddenly pseudoscience.
So yes, in effect, these children are being recruited to be trans. They're being turned trans.
Oh my god. They're being turned trans. You've had ample time to engage with this honestly. And you just don't.
Yes, that is what is happening.
No, it's not.
Kids are being turned trans.
No, they're not.
They are being made into something they are not.
No. That may happen once in a while, where a kid sees somebody who is trans and tries to be trans because they see a content creator or an actress and they respect them, so they try to emulate them, and they realize that they are not that even though they tried to emulate it. That can happen, yes, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about an insidious recruitment mechanism that simply does not exist.
This is deliberate, it is diabolical, it is damaging and destroying many children.
Can you explain how it destroys children? If little Timmy down the road, 2 years later, says that their name is Martha, and they're wearing a wig and they're trying things out because their psychologist said, hey, maybe you should try performing as female for a little while and see if it's more comfortable for you, and they asked me to call them Martha, and I do, and then regardless of what happens with their identity 5 years down the road, how is this kid destroyed? I'd say they're not. They're just a kid. They're existing as a kid. There's nothing wrong with that, Matt. You're focusing so much on children, I can understand why there's this concern that maybe something lies underneath. I'm not saying it's there, but I can at least understand why somebody might come to that conclusion.
And I will not ever stop calling it what it is, no matter how loud the mob screams or what labels they throw. None of that matters to me.
Okay, I'm sure it doesn't. You know why it doesn't? Because when the mob yells at you, you get paid more money. You're not a martyr. You literally get to grift off of the outrage. That's a good thing. It's no different than what happens to me on YouTube. If a giant boatload of drama fell onto my lap and made my life a living hell, it might also have the added benefit of increasing my YouTube engagement. Because you and I both exist in a world where our jobs are tied to social media, where outrage, for better or worse, can be monetized. I know your game because I live in the world where it would benefit me to play it. Matt, you're wrong about a lot of stuff in this video. Moreover, you have demonstrated an inability to argue that these things are damaging. You've argued that they're different, and sure, the world's a different place now than when you grew up. But that doesn't mean anything. On the surface, it means very little, if anything at all. You need to demonstrate why it's dangerous. You need to demonstrate why somebody merely existing as an identity that you either don't understand or won't understand is bad. And it's been hilarious watching your inability to do so. But with all that said, what do you guys think in the comment section below? I want to know your opinions on what Matt has said, demonstrated, or otherwise lacked thereof in doing. With that said, though, if you enjoyed, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please hit the bell notification icon so that you can know when new episodes come out as they are coming out. And if you want to support my channel and what I do, please consider checking the description and checking out my Patreon and other places where you can support my work. With all that said, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.